In this video, we're going to cover how to buy notes from banks. And specifically, we're going to cover, can you buy a note from a bank? Why would you want to buy a note from a bank? Why do banks sell notes? Which banks sell notes? And then a 3-step system for buying notes from banks. So if that's what you're here for, let's get into it. So I remember the first day that I learned that you could buy a note from a bank. And so I was working for banks. I was working independently, selling assets for banks, mostly doing foreclosures, commercial construction and multifamily foreclosures and that kind of thing. And I got a call from a guy on an upcoming auction that we had. And the guy said, "Can I buy the note on this?" And I said, "I have no idea." And so I called my mentor. I said, "Tom, this guy wants to buy the note. Can he buy the note?" And Tom said, "Well, sure, he can buy the note." It seems silly now, but what I didn't know before was that when we're talking about a note, we're talking about this is an obligation, can be traded like any other asset. It can be traded just like anything else. They can be sold when they're performing. They can be sold when they're non-performing. And banks can do this whenever they want. So the fact is that, yes, you can buy the note from the bank. Now, one of the things that comes up a lot, can I just buy one note? It depends. And what it depends on is the size of the bank, the size of the note, the type of the note. But before we get into buying individual notes, let's just back up and change the way we're thinking about that. If you're going to go through the effort of finding a seller and then identifying assets that they need to sell, why would you only want the one note? It doesn't make any sense. There's so much appetite out there right now for notes. If you can find a package, get the package. There are so many investors, so many brokers, so many other ways for you to make money with that. Just because you can't personally buy like the entire package doesn't mean that you throw out the package of notes because you're not buying one single. It doesn't make any sense. So don't do that. So stop thinking about this in terms of, I just want to buy one note. Can I call banks and buy one note? Don't think like that. If you discover that they have more to sell, then you should figure out how you're going to make money with that. So don't pigeonhole yourself into, well, I'm just looking for one note. That doesn't make any sense. All right. So that takes us to the next thing, which is, why would you buy a note from a bank? Okay. And so the short answer is the discount. If you're not sure why you buy a note from a bank, then you should check out some of our other articles, because it sounds like you're at a place where you don't quite understand note investing. What I'm going to assume is that you already know why you want to invest in notes, and that's not what we're going to talk about here. We're just going to talk about how to buy notes from banks, okay? So you might be wondering, why do banks sell notes? So there are a number of reasons for this. One can be that they want to stay out of the chain of title. For example, things like gas stations or other potentially environmentally compromised or questionable assets. Bank might not want to be in the chain of title for those. In fact, I've seen a lot of deep discounts on assets like that. Another reason is they would want to avoid dealing with the municipalities. A lot of municipalities these days are having tighter regulations on how their REO and foreclosures are handled in their counties or in their cities. And another reason would be just to avoid foreclosing on specific borrowers. Another is for speed. There's also a lot of compliance and regulation that banks have to deal with that you and I don't have to deal with. There are lots of reasons why banks sell notes, but the key for you is going to be to find the banks that are selling them. You can find out why they're selling those particular packages later, but I've seen everything from loans just being out of covenant to them no longer being in the lending box that the lender would like to see them in. There's so many different reasons that banks sell notes. The main thing there is to find the ones who are selling the notes. Okay, so which banks sell loans or notes to investors? And the answer is that a lot of them do. What I'm going to suggest you focus on, especially in the beginning, unless you're a big fund, then I suggest that you start with your local, community, and regional lenders. And what I'm talking about are banks that are not the Bank of America, banks that are not Wells Fargo or Capital One or US Bank, which isn't to say that you can never do deals with those banks, but especially when you're first starting off, especially if you're a small fish, these smaller, more local banks are where you're going to have your best shot. And so this is going to get you where you want to go a lot faster. Now, here's the thing, is that there are a lot of banks and credit unions. I think today we're over 11,200 something. That means is that, you can't just pick up the phone and call them all. You have to identify which ones you should be working with. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. In general, the way that you want to start with this is with your smaller institutions, because you're going to be able to speak more directly to real decision makers. You're going to have less red tape. You're going to be taken more seriously, and you're going to have manageable deal sizes. If you're watching this video to learn about this, then you should probably be starting with your local, regional, and community banks. That's the way to start. So how do you find these banks? If there's 11,000 some odd banks and credit unions, how do you find out which ones you should actually be spending your time with? And so here's the thing, is that banks don't list, nobody lists the individual loan status for any particular loan. So you can't, for example, see that Mr. Jones over at 123 Main Street is 35 days behind on his loan. That's not reported anywhere, okay? The thing is that there's a bunch of information out there about how to find these, about which banks have them, and there are a few different sources. And so I want to get into that now so that you know how to find these banks, which is really step one in the three-step system that we're talking about, which is you're going to find your lender prospects. There's a couple ways to go about this. So you can do this with free public data sources. So the FDIC, which is at fdic.gov, the FFIEC, and the NCUA. These are all regulatory bodies for banks and credit unions, and they have reporting where they will actually show you what is happening in the portfolio. So you can see what sort of a non-performing residential mortgage loan volume does any bank or any credit union in the entire United States have. In fact, you can get all sorts of details in there. Now, this is a matter of going in and downloading spreadsheets and PDFs and that kind of thing. But I want to tell you about something else, which is Bank Prospector, which is a software that we have at DistressPro.com, and it's built specifically for folks like you who are looking to do non-performing note or REO deals direct with banks and credit unions. What we do is we pull in all the information from all the banks and all the credit unions on their late and non-performing loans and REO, as well as health and other sell and motivation type indicators. And you can see things like the non-performing portfolio by asset types. You can see what's happening inside the lender's distressed assets pipeline, how much of each kind of deal might they have available in there. You can see whether or not the lender is holding loans specifically for sale that are non-performing. You can see if they've sold them in the past, and a bunch of other stuff that helps you identify, of this world of thousands of lenders, which one of these lenders should I actually spend time emailing or calling in order to find the deals? Because that's how these deals are found, which really brings us to step number 2, which is finding decision makers. Deals like this are done between people. Here's sort of some of the things that go into figuring out who's in charge of selling notes at any particular bank. For one thing, depends on the size of the bank and the asset type. I have been involved in deals where it was a commercial note that went all the way up to the president because it was such a small bank and such a big deal. Sometimes there's a secondary marketing desk. You might find that it's a special assets or a workout officer, especially in commercial. You might find out that it's just some senior level of management, somebody who's responsible for credit or for commercial lending. And so it really depends, but your job, should you choose to accept it, and if you want to do these kinds of deals, is to find out who is responsible for these things. And the way you're going to do that is with email and LinkedIn and by phone, because you're going to have to make a personal contact with these folks. Okay, you're never going to log on and just enter your bid. And I don't want to say never because it could happen down the road. But today, that's not the way it works, not for any bank that I'm aware of. That is step 2, is we're going to find and connect with our decision maker. For our subscribers, for Bank Prospector subscribers, they have access to more than 30,000 bank contacts. So our full-time contact managers, and all they do is add, update, clean, purge, edit contacts. We do that with about 1,000 contacts per month in terms of like purging and adding. If we don't have a contact that you're looking for at a bank, we have a concierge contact request form where you'll actually just put in your title at the bank, and then our team gets out there and they'll go find them however they need to find them and get you the information if it's available anywhere. Which brings us to step 3, which is implementing a system so that you can be there for the sales. Some banks sell on a regular basis. I worked with a large lender and we could count on the second quarter and fourth quarter all the time. Just selling. It's fantastic. Some of them only sell periodically. Just because they don't have something to sell today doesn't mean that they won't have something to sell next month or next quarter or even tomorrow. These are folks who have jobs. They're sitting at a desk. They come in, at 8:30 or 8:45, and they get their briefcase and a bologna sandwich, and they sit down there, and they might have no files on their desk at the beginning of the morning. By the end of the day, they've got a file on their desk, and they know that now it's on and this thing's got to go. What you need to do is, after we've identified, okay, here are the lenders we want to talk with, here are the people who are in charge of this, now you need a system for following up. You need a system so that you are not spending all of your time doing this, but so that you're still top of mind when it comes time for them to sell, so that you can be there when the deals happen. And that is my best advice for folks. A lot of folks don't do what it takes. Maybe they'll make one call or they'll send an email and say, nobody's selling. Well, not if you handle it like that. No, then nobody's selling because you're not there at the right time. And so that's one of the things that we teach inside of the academy, is how to set up a system so that you can be there when the sales happen. Buying notes from banks can be hugely profitable, okay? Whether you're brokering and making transaction fees, or you're buying them for your own account if you have raised money, or you're lucky enough to be or productive enough to be independently wealthy, or if you've raised funds or whatever it is. Here's what I just want to recap with you, is that if you're going to buy notes from banks, okay, first thing is start with your local and regional lenders. And then what you need to do, because there are so many lenders, you need to narrow that down. And so I suggest that you identify the banks and credit unions that are the most likely to sell. And you can do that by looking at some of their publicly available indicators, like what's in their portfolio. Have they sold before? Do they have anything that's held for sale now? What sort of non-performing loan ratios do they have? All of this kind of thing, which we teach you about in our free class and also in the academy. The next thing to do, okay, is you're going to find the people who are in charge of selling, because this business is definitely a people business. So if you're not willing to engage with people, you should just forget about buying notes from banks at all, because you're going to have some conversation. You're going to be on the phone, you're going to meet them on LinkedIn, you might even go to a symposium or conference, and you're going to do some email, and that's the way the business works. And then finally, you need a system so that you're going to be there when the bank is selling notes, because you could call the perfect prospect today and they just simply don't have anything, and then you could find out that next week they've got something and they've got 2 weeks to get it sold. And so the thing for you is to get in there and to establish yourself as somebody with them who they can trust, and they're gonna like to hear from. And then you're gonna have to set up a system, ideally something somewhat automated, so that you're always there, so that you're top of mind whenever they're looking to make a decision to sell. Bank Prospector will help you do all of the research, help you find who you need to reach out to. It'll help you see which banks you should contact. It'll help you find out the exact person, their name, email, title, etc. And then if you don't already have a system for prospecting and following up, then I suggest you check out our training in the Academy, where we'll walk you through proven systems for getting your foot in the door and then being there when the deals happen. So that's how you buy notes from banks. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you got any questions at all, go ahead and ask them down there in the comments. And I've got a couple of links here to some free resources and also to the Bank Prospector software that we talked about. Get out there, buy some notes from banks.